All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 1883 Speaker Series. My name is Mike Wozniak, and I'm the Coordinator of Leadership and Programming in the Student Involvement and Parent Programs Office. Each week we invite a campus or community leader to talk about how today's student can develop their leadership skills, as well as other advice regarding personal and professional development. We hope you learn some valuable lessons in the next 18 minutes and 83 seconds. For today's speaker, please join me in welcoming the Dean of the John D. Odegard School of Aerospace Sciences, Dr. Robert Kraus.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Do you know how long it took me to find that font? Retro Grunge West is what it was. And so I did actually look up Yellowstone and which font they use in the TV show and all that kind of stuff, and that's the closest one you can get to it. All right, here's a dating question. How many of you know who that is? And remember that. Students probably don't. This is from October of 1992. This was the vice presidential debate. So there were three candidates in the vice presidential debate. It was Dan Quayle, the sitting vice president. It was Al Gore, who was running with Bill Clinton, and it was Admiral James Stockdale. And so Admiral Stockdale gets on stage, or the three of them are standing up there, and he says, "Who am I? Why am I here? I'm not a politician." Okay, I'm not a politician. And a lot of memes were made of that, even though memes weren't a thing back then. But Saturday Night Live had a field day with he and Ross Perot as the candidate over that. But the reason I bring it up is Admiral Stockdale is an amazing man. He spent more than 6 years as a prisoner of war during the Vietnam War. And there were a lot of things that happened to him during that time that I'm going to talk about, what kind of philosophy and things like that allowed him to get through that. So as we talk about philosophy, there was a book written back in 1989 that many of you have heard of, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to get up on this stage and talk about Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? However, it's a combination of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 7 habits. I'm going to talk a little bit about philosophy and my leadership style and kind of how those all fit together. So one of the things in the book that they talk about is circles, right? There are circles of control, circles of influence, circles of concern. There are things that happen to people in their lives that you have no control over. The one thing that we do have control over is how we react to those things. And so that's what falls under the circle of control. Our behaviors, our actions, and our reactions are all under our control. Now we can change the size of those circles. As we gain more experience, as we gain more proficiency in things, we can make the circles bigger. We can change how much we have an influence over or how much we have a control over. And the big thing here is to realize, okay, yes, there are things I can control, and yes, there are things I cannot. Should I worry as much about the things I cannot? This was not a new concept in 1989 from Stephen Covey. So we're going to jump back in time, more than 2,000 years. So there's this guy from Cyprus, okay? He's on a ship. This ship wrecks. He loses everything that he possibly could have, right? He has nothing. So he ends up in Athens, Greece. And so he's walking around and he sees these guys wearing fancy, bed sheets and philosophizing. And one of them was in another movie called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. His name was Socrates, or as we refer to him as Socrates, right? So this guy listens to Socrates and he says, hey, I kind of like what this guy's talking about. And then he listened to some other people that were philosophizing at the time. And he says, you know what? I don't like what these guys over here are saying, but I do kind of like what these other guys, the cynics, are talking about. And so he kind of created his own philosophy. And he then started standing on his painted porch, which is outside the Agora in Athens, Greece. And it is what we call today Stoicism. So the guy's name is Zeno. He's from Citium, which is Cyprus today. And so Zeno's not really the guy that people talk about when they talk about Stoicism. Instead, it's flash forward a couple hundred years after that, it's some other guy. He kind of led the Roman Empire. So Hadrian, many of you are familiar with Hadrian because he built this wall across England. That's most of what people know about Hadrian. And you can go walk the wall, right? It's a great place to go visit and everything like that. Well, Hadrian was emperor of the Roman Empire. He did not have any children of his own, or if he did, he didn't like them. So he named another guy his heir. And so when he passed away, Marcus Aurelius was too young to become emperor. So he had a regent that helped him take care of things, but eventually he became emperor. the thing that he is most remembered for was he wrote a book called Meditations. It's the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And so that is kind of the handbook of Stoicism today. So as we talk about the circles of control and circles of influence and concern, it's really about what are the things that we have control over that matter, right? And so that's kind of a philosophy of where we go. A more modern take on that is from this advertising exec who decided that advertising and marketing was not his bailiwick, and so he decided to write about other stuff. So his name's Ryan Holiday. Has a website called The Daily Stoic. He also has a bookstore in Texas called The Painted Porch. And so he's got all kinds of books about it, about Stoicism, and there's 3 in particular that I do want to point out. And so if you're interested in learning more about Stoicism, what it means today, and how we can apply these things to our lives, he is a fantastic author to look into. And Admiral Stockdale, is a big part of several of his books, and how Stoicism got Admiral Stockdale through his years of captivity. So going back to the 7 habits. So be proactive. Okay, there's a lot of different ways to talk about that. One of the ways I would say is just show up. So years ago, I was a second lieutenant in the Air Force, and I'm a co-pilot on an airlift aircraft. My job was to fly cargo and to take off and land and to carry the secrets and whatever else the aircraft commander told me to do, right? And so it's not the most exciting of jobs, other than we got to travel around the world. But what I noticed was every once in a while there'd be a call, they needed a volunteer for something, or they needed somebody to take on a project or things like that. And I'm like, I got nothing else to do. I'm not married. I'm single, living in an apartment by myself. I'm going to go do this stuff. And what I noticed was the more I did it, one, it made my life more fulfilling, but it also got me recognized. And it also got me selected for more positions. And so when it came time for my next assignment, my boss at the time, the squadron commander, knew what I wanted to do. And so he actually saw an assignment come up that would work for me. He actually put me in for that assignment. I came back from a trip. I go in and the secretary says, oh, by the way, you volunteered for an assignment while you were gone. And you're going to go live in Southern California in the desert. And I'm like, oh, well, it turns out that was a great thing. Another book that I will recommend, Getting Things Done. So many of us are inundated by emails every day, right? There are emails that take 2 seconds to answer. There are emails that, no, I actually need to put some thought into, right? And so this getting things done is kind of a triage. How do you triage your emails? There are things that if I just do it now, it's done. I don't have to worry about it, get it over with. And so there's other things I need to put some time and thought into, put those in another pile, and don't forget them, because it's easy to do that. The other book I want to point out, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. So this is much more about taking responsibility. So it's easy to sit back and say, it's not my problem, right? But he's very much about being a part of the solution. You see a problem, fix it. Or you see a problem, find the person in charge. Very much about going back to that circle of influence. You may not be the person in control, but you may be able to influence the decision. And so put some effort into it. Find the person in charge. Find who it is that does have the control. Give them your input. So when you see a problem with something, take extreme ownership and help solve the problem. So now we're going to get a little morbid. Remember, you're all going to die. Okay? That's what this phrase means. Memento mori. So Latin, it's about that, right? And so this painting is from the late 1600s, a Dutch painter, but there's a lot of images. When you type this in, it is amazing how many paintings of skulls and things that you can find that are actually not, morbid and satanic or things like that, but they actually are about the fleetingness of life. We can die at any time. We don't know when it's going to happen. For most of us, the average person today lives 80 years. 80 years equates to 4,160 weeks. So there are calendars you can buy that have 4,160 squares. 52 blocks across a row, and then rows. Okay? And so as you go through each week in your life, you just mark off that week, right? And so really what this is about is time is fleeting. Take time to enjoy life, because we're not going to be here forever. So the main point of the entire presentation, if you take one thing away, it's this. Live your dash. What do I mean by that? Gravestone. Name on a gravestone. Today is not my birthday, by the way. I just put a date up there. However, I was born in 1969, so now many of you know how old I am. Okay. 80 years, expectation, looking at my ancestors, 80 years is about right. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And so, but when you look at that, when you look at gravestones, that's generally what people look at. What's the person's name? When did they live? Right? When were they born? When did they die? The most important thing on this gravestone is the dash. What did that person do in their life? So part of, going back to the 7 habits, begin with the end in mind, the second habit, one of the exercises they have you do is to write an obituary. So rather than write the obituary, how about live your life so that you have an obituary to write when you're gone? All right, how many musicians do we have in the audience? All right, what is this symbol? Anyone know? Not the quarter note. Crescendo. Okay, what does crescendo mean? Increase volume, slowly, on a gauge of that is basically increasing volume as you go, or backwards as you go this way, since I'm on stage. So Stephen Covey had a daughter, Cynthia Covey. She's married, last name's Haller now. He passed away, and she worked with him before he passed away to take a bunch of notes and go through the ideas that he had after the other books were written. She published a book called Live Life in Crescendo. And really what that means is to never slow down. Continue being busy in your life. Much more a factor for those who are getting closer to retirement, because how many times have we heard stories about people that retired and then they died a year or two later, right? Or people that just tend to slow down as they continue in life, as opposed to continuing. So one person who's taken this to heart is my mother. My mother was an art teacher, okay? So she was busy teaching elementary school kids until she retired. So she's 80 years old now, and when she retired, I think she was busier the year after she retired than she was when she was working. Traveling, doing things, visiting friends, all those kinds of things. Don't slow down, keep living. Now, the most profound statement of the entire presentation, remember, no matter where you go, there you are. So for Dr. Link and the science fiction references, there was a movie back in the 1980s called The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. I do not recommend the movie. However, it was one of those things where you're watching the movie and this phrase is said, and you're like, wow, that is profound, right? But it's so true. I mean, there's Star Wars references to this too, where Yoda's talking to Luke Skywalker, says you're always worried about the future and all your friends and everything else that's going on, and you're never worried about where you are, right? It's really about living your dash and making the most of the moment that you're in. Because sometimes you may end up where you don't expect it. 24 years old, I'm riding a camel by the pyramids. A few years later, I'm flying an airplane, a new airplane, by the way, not made by Boeing, through a hurricane. Okay? And then my wife and I have been able to travel and make adventures since we've been married. So we've been married coming up on 20 years. Right after we got married, my wife, who's from the West, Colorado and Arizona, we got married, and I got orders to move to New Jersey. Neither of us had ever lived there. We're moving to New Jersey. And all we know is the stereotypes about Jersey, okay? However, we know Jersey's close to Philadelphia. We know that Jersey's close to Gettysburg. We know that Jersey's close to Baltimore and New York City and all of these incredible places to go and see and do, right? And so we moved to New Jersey, and we made a list. We said, okay, we're only going to be here 3 years because it's military assignment. We made this list. We want to go here. We want to do this. We want to do that. It was an awesome assignment because we did that. And we have continued to do that for every assignment that we had in the military, including taking our dog on a cruise across the Atlantic Ocean. So that was pretty cool. Looking at the castles or chateaus in the Loire Valley in France, because we lived over there for a couple years. But it really is about enjoying the moment, enjoying where you are in your life. All right, third habit, put first things first. So let me get to my notes here and make sure I got everything that I wanted to talk about on that. All right. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, All right, so some of you know that as Shakespeare from As You Like It, okay? But when we look at each of our lives, we have different roles. And so I look at my roles. So I'm a husband, I'm a dog dad, we don't have kids ourselves, and I'm the dean of aerospace. And there's probably a lot of other roles in there. But when I look at what's important in my life, it starts with those roles, right? And so when I look at decisions about should I go on a trip, should I do something, should I go somewhere, what is it that I should be doing? I take those things into consideration and prioritize based on what's important to me. And a lot of that is based on core values. And those core values are defined by those roles that I have in my life. Skipping ahead to the fifth habit, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So back to New Jersey. My wife and I will say I come from a privileged white background. I'm a normal kid that grew up in America. I ended up not having to pay for my college because I went to the Air Force Academy. It was paid for by someone else. But there's a lot of things that I grew up doing. I had the opportunity to do things. So we're stationed in New Jersey. We have a couple that lives a couple doors down from us. We became really good friends with them. They were of a different race. So my wife and I go out to dinner with them one night. Go to this restaurant that we've been to. I can't tell you how many times we've been to this restaurant. Never had a problem at this restaurant. We walk in with this other couple. First thing we notice is we're not served right away. Next thing you notice, we're put in a back corner to be seated, which, understanding, you never know, right? But then the service at the meal was horrible. All of these things, when you add them together, it was the first time I had actually seen racism. And it's not the kind of stuff that we see every day. It's little things. It's the things that we don't notice unless it's something that we're subject to. And so it got me thinking more and more about that, about treating people with dignity and respect. A few years later, I was at the Air Force Academy on faculty, and we do those faculty book groups. One of the books we read was called Whistling Vivaldi. So the author, black individual, walking down the street, notices people are crossing the street to avoid him. So he decides to do an experiment. He starts whistling Vivaldi's Four Seasons as he's walking down the street. What he notices as he's doing this, people don't cross the street anymore, right? And it's simple little changes like that stereotypes are so prevalent in our society that we just don't even notice them. And so I've spent a number of years now just looking into things like this, about how the brain works, how our habits work, and things like that. The one book that is really, I would call the highlight of much of this is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And so if you're looking for one book about behavior, Thinking Fast and Slow is an amazing book, because you think about gut reaction versus taking time to think about it. So he gets into the neurology side of it, but he gets into the emotional side of it. And so it's just an amazing book to consider. So, believe it or not, there aren't just 7 habits. There actually is an 8th habit. So, a couple years after the first book was written, due to its success and everything, Stephen Covey came out with a book called The 8th Habit, From Effectiveness to Greatness. And so, he really talked about finding your voice and inspiring others. And so, the first part of the 7 habits is the internal stuff. The second part is about your interactions with other people. But the 8th habit is really about teaching those habits to other people so that they can benefit from those types of things. One of the concepts here is to educate, train, and inspire others, right? And so it's about sharing those habits with other people. So at the Air Force Academy, there's a statue, has an eagle with 2 fledglings on it. Every year, they give out a number of awards at graduation to cadets, the outstanding cadet in this major, or the outstanding cadet in military, or whatever it is. And they give us, it is a bronze statue of that eagle and fledglings. And so it's something that's embodied kind of my philosophy and core values and everything through my career, which has led me to a career in education now. And it's really about us as the eagle teaching fledglings to literally and figuratively, in some cases, fly, right? So I'm a dean of aerospace, we teach people to fly. But it's much more about educating, training, and inspiring people to achieve what they want in their lives. Last thing on this, value your people. And so it's little things. It's recognizing new employees. It's recognizing when somebody's wife has a baby, when a work anniversary occurs, little things like that that just make, when you have an organization with 400 people in it, what is that 400th person out there? Do they feel that they're part of the organization, right? And so it's just making everyone feel that they belong, that we're all part of the same team at UND. And so with that, kind of running out of time a little bit, talked about kind of the circles of influence, circles of concern, the 7 habits, talked about stoicism. And the big thing to take away from this really is you're all going to die. No, more importantly, live your dash, right? And so what many of you don't know, so in the Air Force we have call signs. Dash actually is my call sign. Unrelated, different story, but coincidence nonetheless. So 20 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Next week, we'll be back here, same time, same place, with Dr. Terry Brenner, Superintendent of Grand Forks Public Schools. We hope to see you there. Thank you.